So the House committee approves a bill to study slavery reparations for the first time. So when something like that happens, that's a good thing, but also pay attention to what is going on right now in this time. Right now, there is civil unrest in Minneapolis because yet another black young man was killed by an officer. And so they're seeking manslaughter charges against that officer for that killing. And for those of you that, if you're asking who this young man is, it's Dante Wright is his name, I believe. And he was 20 years old. He was pulled over at a traffic stop. And a lot of times, from my understanding, what I had read about Minneapolis, I guess out there they have a law where you're not supposed to have dangling air freshener. And a lot of times they feel that is just used to racially profile uh, the citizens of Minneapolis of color, black people in particular. And so this young man was pulled over, and his mother, she made several statements, and Ben Crump, I believe he's proposing to represent her or the family. So it was said that the officer accidentally shot the young man in the traffic stop, and she meant to pull her taser, yet she pulled her gun, her firearm, and he was killed. And so there's civil unrest because the reason why, yet again, another black man is murdered because there's a high profile trial with the George Floyd case. And it's looking like they're trying to find every excuse to say that he died other than of the knee crushing his windpipe. So they had several doctors come in and go on the witness stand and even go into the medical terms and all of the process of what could cause him to die from asphyxiation or a crushed windpipe with a knee on his neck. And so the defense for Chauvin's attorneys, they're trying to find other excuses to say that maybe it was drugs that he was on, George was on, or maybe it was the fact that he was next to the tailpipe. That was the latest thing I saw, that the exhaust, the smoke and the fumes could have killed him. So they're trying to find any reasonable doubt. And if you have one juror that doubts, that's a possible chance for Chauvin to get off on those charges, be dropped, maybe possibly be exonerated. And so this just comes right in on top of all of this chaos. A House committee approves a bill to study slavery reparations for the first time. So they want you to be all exuberated and happy about that, yet you've got all this chaos going on. So I'm going to add something in here, a tidbit, that I'm a resident of South LA, and I've said that on multiple videos. I'm not afraid to say where I reside, or the city, because a lot of things are important here that play a factor in all of what's going on. And so I don't know if the news has expressed this, but McDonald's doesn't close for nothing. Some of these essential businesses don't close. Rain, sleet, snow, earthquake, the business is still thriving. And even with the chaos of coronavirus and the surge and all this going on, these businesses still are able to relatively do well during the pandemic and all the chaos. But early this morning when I went out and I noticed that all of the McDonald's were closed, where the business is open, you can go through drive-through, but at one while they had it where you couldn't, they closed down the eating area, but you could walk in and order your food or go through drive-through. That is no more for several McDonald's that I've been to. And I overheard some males talking, some men. They were talking about all the way down the road. There are other McDonald's they have closed where you can't even go inside the McDonald's now to order food. So it's not just the dining area is closed down, but you cannot even walk inside and order food. And so I don't know why that's not being mentioned. So I assume something must have happened anytime they have it where you can't even walk in and order food. You specifically have to go through the drive-through, because I was looking and I seen a lot of cars in the drive-through, and I said, well, I wonder why that's happening. Is something going on, because usually McDonald's doesn't close for anything. So that's kind of, I can kind of see the level of fear, but then the level of how serious is this disease. So that drew up a red flag for me. I said something really bad must have happened, or they got maybe a message and all of them got the memo and they're following a protocol, and the general public is not aware of the seriousness of this virus, that's gotten worse, and they've kind of dumbed it down on the news because they have schools opening. And so shortly thereafter, I drive around the block and I see that schools are opening slowly and they're accepting students, and all the kids were spread out. They had masks on, and you see the parents, they're really being cautious about bringing their kids in, not really knowing if it's safe or not. And so then I'm here looking at House Committee approves a bill to study slavery reparations for the first time. So I want to put all that dynamic in there for you so to give you a clue that, in the midst of chaos, they want you to switch your thinking to this right here. So I'm going to read into this. This article is not that long. So it's by Savannah Berman. And so Washington legislation, it says to create a commission to study slavery reparations for Black Americans, cleared a House committee Wednesday in a historic vote, making its way to the full House for the first time more than 3 decades after it was initially introduced. Now, this is not getting reparations. So when people see this, they're going to not even look at the study part. They're going to look at reparations. Yay. But that's not what that means. It means it's the start of a study of this. And without even reading this, to my knowledge, if you're studying it, you're trying to see how to best parson out or what you're going to do to provide some type of reprieve or reparation to people who are possibly descendants of slavery. And so that may not be particularly in the form of a check, because we're living in a different time period. And so there's no more of the 40-acre mule type situation, because, we're past that era. So now what you're talking about is maybe looking at maybe mental health, maybe schools, maybe housing, the things that are really much needed. Got a lot of eviction going on right now, a lot of homelessness that is happening, and it's not just people that maybe they were down on their luck or they had substance problems. These are families that are becoming homeless. These are people who maybe they work 2, 3 jobs. They don't make enough money to pay rent. Their rent burden in some of these communities. And so you're trying to see how to do this reparation, not only because of that situation, these situations that are umbrellaed on top of this, but you're also looking at the fact, okay, how can this go a long ways so that the next generation won't experience a wage gap or a wealth gap? What are we going to do with the banks? With maybe allowing people to provide them the means necessary so that they can generate generational wealth for the future to come. And so that's what I'm looking at. The study of this is supposed to be. And so it's going to take some doing. And it's probably not going to be that easy, because you have all these social divides, even within the Black cultures. There's different people from different backgrounds. They may not have been, here in the States. And so we've even had people that were disappointed with that, saying that, how do you know that all these people are direct descendants of slavery? Can they produce something showing that they are? And honestly, a lot of people can't because of the diaspora, people being moved, or they're pulled away from family members. They were made to not know who their people were, their languages or their cultures from far before they they even were born. So they may not even know that maybe they had grandparents that were from a particular tribe. They don't have those documents. Some people may be able to produce documents as to others because of the separations and the separations of families through auctioning off people and moving people from different plantations, who has all of those documents, and then you even hear about what happened with some of the people that were that had maybe had indigenous Indian descendants that were also a part of, African culture. There was some intermixing. There are people that they were kicked out because of being darker or because of being black, because of the stigmatism of it. So that it goes deep. And so that's why I would believe they're having to study all of this. Um, so it says that the legislation H.R. 40 was first introduced 30 years ago and now faces a full House vote. So should it pass the House, and the measure would go to the evenly divided Senate. And so the House Judiciary Committee voted 25 to 17 Wednesday to advance the bill. The bill would establish a 13-person commission to study the lasting impacts from slavery and ongoing racial discrimination throughout the country's history. So the panel would submit its findings to Congress and recommend any necessary remedies, including compensation to Black Americans. So what types of compensations are going to be something that's gonna work, and that's gonna maybe generate wealth for future to come or now, and also provide that, because we talk about the wage gap, we talk about the wealth gap, based on race. So it goes on to say that the legislation or the commission to study and develop reparation proposals for African Americans Act is what it's called. And I said before, many acts are have come about because a lot of times when you read about these laws that are acts that are now in effect, it's because someone went without, or they were discriminated, or they had a terrible thing happen to them, and now they need to create this act to try to set up a structure so where these incidences won't happen again. So it is currently sponsored by a Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, who is a Democrat of Texas. Okay, and so in the statement, Jackson Lee said the vote in the Judiciary Committee was long overdue. So for more than 2 decades before her Representative John Conyers, Democrat of Michigan, introduced it year after year without success. Okay, and so here's, I believe, um, Sheila, um, Miss Sheila. So Lee said that Conyers, if I said her name correctly, I hope I did. Jackson Lee. Okay, in a statement, Jackson Lee said the vote in the Judiciary Committee was long overdue for more than 2 decades. So this is Jackson Lee, and so I'm trying to make for sure I got the name correct, because sometimes they have the names underneath. Okay, so I've seen this woman many times over before, but I couldn't put a name to it. So it's going to include some of the things that I mentioned earlier on before I started reading this. So here she is here. So Lee said that Conyers entrusted her with, Jackson Lee is her name, Miss Jackson Lee, said she was continuing to legislation of his legislation as he had retired. So I took that challenge seriously, and here we are today, marking it up for the first time in history of America. Any legislation that deals directly with the years and centuries of slavery of Africans and African Americans. So notice they put Africans and African American people because of what I said earlier. We had people going around saying, how do we know that all these people, are from directly from here? And, and then we had even a group of people that said that they were DOS and that they were representing only DOS people and only DOS people should receive reparations. So there was a group going around doing that. So notice this is Africans and African American people alike who are now descendants of those Africans. Lee said during Wednesday's hearing, so deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and other Black Americans. Now listen to that. And the ones we're seeing now on trial that are representing the George Floyd trial, and also the situation having to do with this new young man that has just gotten killed. And they mention this, including the recent death of Daunte Wright, have drawn attention to racial inequalities in public consciousness and renewed debate on how to remedy America's history of racism toward African Americans, including in reparations to African Americans. So this is what they're looking at. And so Representative Madeleine Dean, Democrat of PA, the vice chair of the House Judiciary Committee, told USA Today Wednesday, she hoped that there would be openness to have real discussions on the issue, and asked, hasn't the last year educated us or re-educated us about injustices, the historical injustices? Okay, and so reparations, or compensation for historical crimes and wrongdoings with the aim of remedying injustice and helping specific groups of people or populations to prosper, have mostly been experimented with in intentional settings. Okay, and so let me stop for a moment here. So there's some work or maintenance being done close by, so you might hear weird noises in the background. So I just did be mindful of that. If you do hear that, I'm sorry about that. So, and even dogs barking, probably that's neighbors. So going on forward with the article, it says by passing H.R. 40, Congress can also start a movement toward the national reckoning, because a lot of things have been happening. The pandemic, how it's been impacting Hispanic, Black, Latino, Latinx people. And so we need to bridge the racial divides. Reparations are ultimately about respect and reconciliation, and the hope that one day all Americans can walk together towards a more just future, Jackson Lee has said. So that's her name, Jackson Lee. I'm sorry if I messed her name, but I've seen this woman many times over speaking in behalf of all of these events to actually move forward and occur. Um, so Dean said that she believes the study for or of reparations is a reasonable thing to do. And so to an estimate for William Doherty, an economist at Duke University whose research is devoted in inequality in the context of race, and Kristen Mullen, a historian, the cost of compensating Americans descended from slaves for the legacy of bondage subsequent racial oppression could be up to about $12 trillion. So in the U.S., support for reparations for federal government's role in slavery has been both growing and met with skepticism at the same time. So though Congress for the first time formally apologized for slavery in 2008, H.R. 40 has still faced oppositions. And so opponents of the bill called it divisive and argued present day Americans should not be held responsible for consequences of slavery, which ended by the passage of the 13th Amendment in 1865. So that argument also came up. So no one should be forced to pay compensation for what they have not done. And so the Representative Steve Chabot, a Republican of Ohio, said this. So paying reparations would amount to taking money from people who never owned slaves to compensate those who were never enslaved. And so that was his argument. But I'm going to add something there. You have a generation of people who you say they never owned slaves, but their people prior were benefited, and as a result of that, they have now benefited from that system to this day, and how we are disenfranchised as people that are black or people of color. We are we may not have been the ones that were directly enslaved, but we come from the people who were enslaved. And so as a result of that, we have now um, bear the burden of all of not having uh, enough wealth to give or bequeath to our generation to come. So we are far behind in the wage and the wealth gap because of that as a result. And so how it's hurt us. Look at this pandemic. A lot of us are struggling. You see a lot of eviction going on. You see a lot of homelessness going on. That's not by accident. And so these things that may have happened long ago have spilled over into the future generations, where you have one group that has benefited from having people enslaved, so they're able to pass on education or pass on houses or pass on wealth that has been generated through that system. Then you have another group that they were the descendants of these people who were enslaved. And so what does that pass on to their kids? Homelessness, poverty, struggling. You work jobs you're never able to actually achieve the same level of wealth that this other generation was somehow. They don't even have to work very hard, maybe not even at all, because a lot of that wealth is passed down from slave owners or great great grandpas that were able to generate abundance, a lot of wealth, to where they bequeathed houses. Education is at their access. They can relatively walk in and get jobs, as to another person on the other side of the spectrum. You walk in and try to get that job, although you've been to school all your life, but because of your skin color, you don't get hired. They hire the one that doesn't look black, you know. And so that has been the result of this system. This system hasn't gone away. Maybe you don't see people in shackles like you used to. Maybe you don't see slave owners with the whip cracking it at people, but they have a new way of implementing the same system. It's just new people doing it in a different fashion. And so that's what I would say to this Representative Steve Chabot, Republican of Ohio, that you're saying that, yeah, they never owned slaves, and then people who were never enslaved, but the ones who are benefiting from their great grandparents owning slaves have been doing pretty well in this pandemic. you know they're able to access health care, as to my people are not as able to access health care, or they may not be able to survive this pandemic as well, or they have fears because of that system that we're talking about. People feel like, if I take this shot, it's going to be like the Tuskegee experiment, how they treated my great grandpa. They gave him a placebo, or they gave him something that wasn't even a cure for his illness, and he died. And all of our people know what happened. And so we're afraid to take these shots. This system has carried on for generations and generations to come. And so that is the reason why I'm saying to you that's why they are proposing this type of bill and it has passed, because this the racism has not ended. You have a new group of people that are doing it. So Representative Thomas Massey, Republican of Kentucky, a member of the House Judiciary Committee, told USA Today Tuesday night that he would not vote for reparations. See? So you see the same people that are saying they're against this, they're eating well, they have good health care, they can sleep at night, they're not worried about getting evicted. They're not worried about where their kids are going to be educated or whether they're going to have houses, cars, and safety net, because they are in a position of power. And you got some of my people that they had to fight to get into their positions, and they had to prove 10 times over that they were qualified, because it took forever to get where they're at, and you only have a select group that can get to that position. And while you have a masses of people that look like black people like me, that it takes forever to prove that you're worthy to even get in a high paying position, because they look at your skin color first. It says on those applications you're not supposed to judge people, but they do. And I know what that feels like. And many other people like me know what it feels like. So that's what I'm saying in response to this. So this is important. And so it's saying that this particular um, Republican member doesn't want to vote on this reparation at all, or to create a commission to even study it. And so that tells you right there. So the issue but was for looking forward to this discussion on Wednesday. And so Texas Representative Veronica Escobar, a Democrat on the committee, said prior to the vote that she hoped Republicans would approach this with open minds and open hearts. So my hope is that we can approach the idea of equity, the idea of justice, the idea of looking back at a history in order to do what's right for the future. So I hope that they approach it with an open policy mind, or at least keeping that in mind, she concluded. And so the studies have shown the net worth of a typical white family, and this basically elaborates what I was saying. In this time, the net worth of a typical white family is nearly 10 times greater than that of a black family. And so the black Americans are also less likely to own a home. Let me say that again. Black Americans are less likely to own a home than other racial and ethnic groups. And the black poverty rate is doubled that the white uh, rate. And so, according to an analysis by Mullen and Darity, reparations could lead to the elimination of black and white wealth gap within the 10-year span. And so, if the legislation moves to the full House vote and passes, it would face slim chances of making it through the Senate. So, when asked about the issue of in 2019 Senator Majority Mitch McConnell, who is a Republican of Kentucky, whose great great grandfathers enslaved people, and so I'm glad I mentioned what I mentioned earlier, so you can kind of understand where I'm coming from. That he has a good job, he has a car, he has a nice, he knows that his kids can go to college, he knows that he can leave wealth to his family, and they could get a house, they could buy a house, they could sell a house. I know some people who they were able to get a house, buy a house, and sell a house. You know why? Because they had family members that benefited in this system, and they now benefit in this system, and they don't even have to work. And it isn't because they pulled up their bootstraps and they worked hard. You know why it is? And here's the hard pill to swallow. It's because they're white, and because their great grandparents were slave owners. And that's the reason why they were able to buy a house and sell a house and get a new house and go and move to some other city and buy a new house. And people like me can't do that easy. And so we know why. And so Mitch McConnell, who was a Republican of Kentucky, whose great great grandfather enslaved people on Alabama cotton farms, said in a hearing, now listen to his talk on the topic, that he didn't think that reparations for something that happened 150 years ago. That's because you're living in a nice home. That's because you can have health care. That's because you don't have to worry about your kids going out there and getting a knee in the neck by cops because of what they look like. And so that is coming from me, not this article. And it makes sense. And it says he feels the same way like some of the other Republicans that are in his position, that it was something that happened 150 years ago. But you are benefiting, he's benefiting from something that happened 150 years ago. And after it happened 150 years ago, where are my people at now? We're looking at a trial. We're looking at black people getting shot in the street for air freshener dangling in their car. We're looking at a system that oppresses black people, that evicts. More evictions have happened in South LA every week. I'm looking at a new eviction every week, and you work as hard as you can. You explain from top to bottom why you couldn't work because your job closed down because of this COVID, but they yet still want to harass you for the rent money. And so Mitch McConnell, he says he doesn't want to vote for something that happened 150 years ago, for whom none of us currently living are responsible, he claims. But you are benefiting from that system. It puts you in a good position. You can thrive through this pandemic unless you somehow catch the virus. But some of us have no other alternative but to get out there and work and expose ourselves to this freaking virus. And so he says that he's saying we're not responsible. None of us living currently are responsible. And he doesn't think that it's a good idea. And so we try to deal with our original sin of slavery by fighting the Civil War and by passing a landmark civil rights legislation and by electing an African American president. He feels because Obama was elected that we should leave it alone. Okay, so Senator Cory Booker, who is a Democrat of New Jersey, has filed a companion version of the bill that would need the support of at least 10 Senate Republicans to advance in the Senate past the filibuster. Okay, and so President Joe Biden said that in February he supported studying reparations. Now, this is the study of reparations, not giving reparations. It's to study so that they could see what could be a possible, something doable for the foreseeable future. But yet you got these Mitch McConnell and all these other people, they don't even want you to study it. That just tells you racism is still alive and thriving. So leaders of the Congressional Black Caucus met with Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris at the White House for the first time Tuesday to lay out their policy vision, which included a conversation with the administration on reparations. And so that's basically the article. And I know I went longer than the article itself, but I get what they're doing. But pay close attention here, that what is happening right now, there is a trial going on. Do you see how they have it so nicely barricaded? They are ready for people to flip out. I feel like they already know what's going to happen, what could happen. And I I will say this. Chauvin's lawyers are fighting to the tooth and nail for him to get exonerated and to get the charges dropped. What does that say from here on out if they allow this man, after the whole nation saw on video what happened to George Floyd? How is that going to leave a mark on American society if they let this officer walk? What do you think is going to happen? And they just had another young man die, all because they accidentally were supposed to pull a taser, but they pulled the gun out on him and killed him for a traffic stop. He's pulled over and they rousted him over his air freshener hanging in his car. And so they have some kind of law in Minnesota that you're not supposed to have air freshener hanging in your car. It's illegal. Wow. And I'm thinking here in California, all the people that ride around with air freshener hanging in their car. And most of them that you see are, in my neighborhood, you see a lot of Hispanic, a lot of blacks, and a lot of people from different backgrounds, Asian. A lot of people have air freshener in their car. It may not necessarily be dangling, but sometimes it is. You know, it'd be a lot of people breaking the law, I suppose. A lot of people for cops to pull over and mess with. So, if you get my drift. But anyway, here we are yet once again. And so we're looking at this and we're made to feel that this is the fix all. But it's a start. Yet the start is even being stalled by the same group who claims that 150 years ago we shouldn't be held responsible for something that we didn't do. Although you're sitting in nice homes. We just had the whole thing with the, rich people. Most of them were wealthy people, and they lied to get into USC and some of the top colleges in the US. Yale, Princeton, all these schools. They had a white guy that was taking tests, and they had a back door because of this guy who basically he made money off of the rich and wealthy people to get kids that weren't even didn't even have the GPA or the grades. They weren't even getting sports scholarships. They just were like privileged white kids, and they can get into these schools and get these educations. What is that? Another same part of the system, just new people doing it another way, scamming. And these are your CEOs, these are your managers, your bosses you're working under now. How do you know that their credentials is even valid? And you're the worker under them. You've had just as much education, but because you're black or you're a person of another color background, you can't get CEO status. You can't get manager status, even though you worked for it. You did pull up your bootstrap. They keep yelling that. Pull up your boot. Pulling up the bootstraps doesn't work. It never did. That was just a trope that they would go on to try to create this smokescreen, so you would feel like you weren't working hard enough, and then you had to, black people that come from black families know you had your parents. You got to be 10 times better, and 10 times better. You be 10 times better, and you go and apply for that position, they still won't hire you because you can be 10 times better and 10 times more educated, but you can't change your skin color. So they hire the one that's white over your 10 times educated. Yes, you're 10 times as better. And you're 10 times, you know the material like the back of your hand. The boss is asking you how to do his job because he had somebody lie and cheat for him on his test. That's how he got his position, and then also his skin color and his money, his wealth. Yet that was bequeathed from 150 years ago because his great great grandpappy was a slave owner. But Mitch McConnell says that they're not responsible and they didn't do it. They didn't. They didn't. They didn't do it. But what we see every week, a new shooting of a black person. We don't see this many shootings of white people and the trial whole profile like that. The only white person that I ever saw that got treated like a black person was White Boy Rick. And why? Because he talked black, he acted like he was, because who he was around, and the very system The very people, they taught him all of that, put him out there with the dogs, and it took forever for him to get out of prison. And then when they finally, this man is a grandfather now. He's still incarcerated. He's trying to fend off some other charges. That's the only white person, and he really, I would say he was like he was a black man in a white body. That's the only person I could say that he actually experienced. He got the black experience. And who was he? He had kids with a black woman. He dated black women. You know, they hated that. They hated it. They hated that he knew the streets, but they taught it to him. They left him out there, and what do we see now? He's the only one, but these rest of these people, these jokers, they got houses, they got cars, they passed their wealth on to their kids that don't even deserve it, and this is what you see, you know. And so those are the only people that I know of that, you know, if we're saying here, that I had any type of experience, it would have been white boy Rick that had the black experience, and he was wanted dead, you know, and he dealt with the wheelers and dealers in the street. But other than that, these other people, that ain't you. That ain't you. That's not what you dealt with. You haven't dealt with that. You dealt with cheating and lying and conquering people and hiding who you are. You don't come out and admit that you have benefited from a system that's propped your people up and made your people pretty much safe during this pandemic. And you even had people coming from wealthy areas going to the poor black neighborhoods getting shots in their arms, lying so they can jump ahead in the line. That's how privilege does. That's what it does. You got these managers and these bosses. I had a person tell me, I've been in my job 25 years. I can't be fired. So that gives her the license to say all kind of racial stuff, epithets, say all kind of racial things to the black people that work underneath her. Because it makes her feel a sense of pride because her skin color propped her up. Think about it.